why would you need a bonus? He chuckled, so I canceled their anniversary gift, used the $3,000 to buy my own office, and let them watch me cut the ribbon. The anniversary always felt like a milestone Richard and I were supposed to celebrate, but over the years, I came to realize that it had become just another date on the calendar for him, and a day I had to make special. Richard worked in sales for a tech company, and I stayed home with the kids, keeping everything running smoothly, except my own dreams. I'd put those aside, always telling myself there'd be time for my own career later. After all, he was working hard, bringing in the money. He'd tell me how lucky I was to not have to worry about work, about money. It was always a subtle reminder that he was the provider, and I was just the one who managed everything else. I never complained. In fact, I was the picture of the perfect wife. I kept the house in order, made sure the kids had everything they needed, and kept up with all the social obligations. I thought I was doing everything right, but deep down, I felt invisible. I felt like he didn't truly see me for who I was beyond the roles I played. But I never said anything, until that night. It started innocently enough. Richard came home late from a work event, smelling faintly of alcohol, a slight smirk on his face. He kicked off his shoes and dropped his jacket on the couch before flopping down next to me. I was sitting there, as always, waiting for him to return. "Babe, you're going to need to do something nice for our anniversary this year," he said, still scrolling through his phone. I looked at him, slightly taken aback. "What do you mean?" "Something special," he said, not looking up. "You know, dinner, maybe a spa day, a little bonus for me. Something to show I'm appreciated." It hit me like a brick. I had never gotten anything in return, and now he was suggesting that I should show him appreciation with something extra. And the bonus comment, it stung. I realized that I had spent years putting aside my own desires and dreams to be the supportive wife and mother. But at that moment, I realized that what he was asking for wasn't a bonus in the way he thought. It was a reflection of how little he understood how much I had sacrificed. "Bonus?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice calm. He looked up at me then, his eyes focused for the first time. "Yeah. You know, something special. I work hard, right? A little something to show you recognize that." I couldn't help it. My mind raced and a knot tightened in my stomach. "So, you're asking me to give you a bonus for being the provider, while I've been doing everything at home?" He leaned back, chuckling. "Don't take it so seriously. I'm just saying it'd be nice." But I wasn't laughing. The more I thought about it, the more my resentment built. The idea of a bonus felt like a slap in the face, like he had no idea what it took to run the home, raise the kids, and put my own needs aside year after year. I felt like I had been working too, just in a different way. And in that moment, I knew I had to do something. Not for him, but for me. The next day, I went to my favorite cafe. It was a place I used to visit alone when I needed space, time to think. The weather was chilly, but I found a spot near the window where the sun was just beginning to peek through. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the warmth seep into my body, and I thought about my life. What was I doing with myself? What had I given up? I knew I couldn't keep ignoring my own aspirations for the sake of a marriage that didn't truly see me anymore. I'd always dreamed of owning my own business, even when Richard and I first met. I had big ideas, but they always felt impossible because my life was wrapped up in taking care of everything else. But now, I realized I could do something for myself, without Richard's approval or permission. I wasn't asking for much, just the chance to take control. It took a couple of days, but I found a small commercial space for rent in the downtown area. It was exactly what I needed, a quiet, cozy place where I could focus on building my business. I had saved up $3,000 over the years, from freelance work and other side projects I kept under wraps. I had never spent it, always telling myself it was for something important, but never knowing what that something was. Until now. I didn't tell Richard. Not yet. I knew he wouldn't understand. I knew he would mock me, just like he had with the anniversary bonus. But I didn't care anymore. When I signed the lease for the office, it felt like a weight had lifted off my shoulders. The space was small but perfect. It had huge windows that let in plenty of light, and the building was located in a quiet part of town, away from the busy traffic, which was exactly what I needed. I had never felt so alive in years. The money I had saved wasn't enough to start a full-blown business, but it was a step. And that was more than I had ever done before. Richard still hadn't asked me about our anniversary. It was like he had forgotten about it entirely. But I hadn't forgotten. I had a plan. A few weeks later, the day of our anniversary finally arrived. I didn't get him anything, because I already knew what he would want: a lavish gift, an extravagant dinner. Instead, I got myself something. Something I had dreamed of for years. I invited Richard to the ribbon-cutting ceremony for my new office. It felt surreal. When I told him, he just stared at me. He didn't say anything at first, probably thinking I was joking. "You're serious?" he asked finally, his tone flat. "Yeah, I'm serious," I said, my voice steady. "I'm opening my own business. This is my anniversary gift, to myself." "You're joking," he muttered, clearly not understanding the gravity of what I was saying. "No," I replied, my voice quieter now, "I'm not joking." That evening, when we arrived at the office, Richard still looked confused. But I could feel the excitement bubbling inside me. This was my moment. The ceremony was small, just a few close friends, family, and a couple of colleagues I had invited. Richard stood off to the side, arms crossed, not really participating. When I took the scissors and cut the ribbon, the crowd applauded. And I saw Richard's face, his eyes cold and judgmental. But for the first time, it didn't matter. I was free. I had done it for myself. As I cut the ribbon, I couldn't help but smile. For once, I was proud of something I had built all on my own, without anyone's help or approval. But as Richard stood there, watching me, I knew that things would never be the same again. And in that moment, I felt more alive than I ever had before. As the applause died down, I could still feel Richard's eyes on me, cold and distant. It was as if he wasn't even seeing me anymore. The man I had married, the father of my children, was standing there, a stranger in my life. I tried not to let it bother me, but it was hard. His indifference stung. He had always been the center of our life, and I had spent so long bending myself around his needs, making sure everything was comfortable for him. But now? Now, everything was different. The rest of the evening went by in a blur. My family and friends congratulated me, and for a moment, it almost felt like I was finally being seen for the first time in years. I had done something just for me, and it felt good. But Richard stayed quiet, his mouth set in a hard line. When everyone else left, he was the last to go. He didn't say much, just grumbled something about being tired and left in a hurry. I watched him go, and the weight of it hit me all at once. We didn't talk much that night. I was still buzzing from the ceremony, but Richard retreated into his usual silence. When he finally spoke, it wasn't about the office or my business, it was about something entirely different. "You really think you're going to make it?" he asked, his voice low. "You think this little office is going to change anything?" I wasn't sure if I should be offended or if it was just him being dismissive. He wasn't used to seeing me do something on my own, and part of me thought he had no idea how deep my decision ran. "I don't know if it will change anything," I replied, the calmness in my voice surprising even me. "But it's mine. And that's all that matters." The words hung between us, thick and heavy. I had never felt such a stark divide in our relationship before. Richard had always been the one who took control of everything: finances, decisions, even our social life. But now, for the first time, I was standing firm in my own decision. He didn't know how to handle it, and I could see it in his eyes. The way he looked at me wasn't with admiration or even disappointment, it was more like he was looking at a stranger, someone he didn't quite understand anymore. And maybe I was a stranger to him now. The days that followed were a mix of excitement and dread. I was busy getting my business off the ground, dealing with small details and trying to figure out what I wanted to focus on. But in the back of my mind, Richard's words kept echoing. He hadn't been supportive, and if I was being honest with myself, I wasn't sure if he ever would be. At home, everything felt tense. The routine that used to be so familiar now felt like an endless tug-of-war. Richard had started spending more time working late again, which I knew meant he was just avoiding being at home. When he did come back, his eyes were always distant, like he was somewhere else. He had stopped asking about my business, stopped offering the small words of encouragement he used to give when I did something good. I knew he didn't get it. And that made it harder to ignore the growing chasm between us. One night, after a long day at the office, I came home to find Richard sitting in the living room, staring at the TV but not really watching it. The house was silent except for the low hum of the television, and the kids had already gone to bed. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching him. He looked tired, but there was something else in his eyes, something I couldn't place. I cleared my throat, and he turned to look at me, his face unreadable. "I've been thinking," he said, almost too casually. "Maybe I was too harsh about the business thing. I mean, if it makes you happy, then I guess I can support it, in my own way." I blinked, surprised. I wasn't sure if it was genuine or just him trying to avoid a confrontation, but it felt like a half-hearted attempt at making peace. His tone was flat, almost dismissive. "Thanks, I guess," I said, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "I don't need your approval, Richard. But it would have been nice to have it." He didn't respond. He just turned his attention back to the TV, his posture stiff. And in that moment, I realized just how far apart we had grown. He didn't understand me anymore. Maybe he never had. Days turned into weeks, and things only seemed to get worse. Richard wasn't the same anymore. He had always been a little distant, but now it felt like he was actively avoiding me. There were no more late-night conversations or even small gestures of affection. We barely spoke unless it was about the kids or some obligation. The emotional connection I once thought we had was slipping away. I spent more time at the office, working long hours, diving into my business with a passion I hadn't felt in years. It was my escape, my sanctuary. I was building something that was finally mine. I found myself looking forward to the quiet moments in my new office, organizing, brainstorming, and just being alone with my thoughts. And for the first time, I felt like I was building a future that didn't depend on anyone else's approval but my own. But it wasn't just work that consumed me. Richard's behavior had shifted so drastically that I started to wonder if our marriage was beyond repair. I didn't want to admit it, but the more I tried to reach out, the more he pulled away. And the more he pulled away, the more I questioned if this was a marriage I could salvage. One night, after another cold exchange between us, I found myself sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone. It was late, but I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept swirling around Richard and everything that had changed. I couldn't stop thinking about the anniversary, about how it had all started. I had thought that maybe, just maybe, this would be a wake-up call for him. But all it did was make him retreat even further. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at the message. It was from a colleague, asking if I had any time to meet and discuss a potential partnership for my business. I smiled to myself, the small spark of excitement bringing me some peace. But just as quickly as the smile appeared, it faded. There was a cold emptiness in my chest. This business, this new chapter of my life, it was everything I had wanted. But could it really fill the void in my heart where Richard used to be? I started to feel like I was losing myself in all of this. On one hand, I was building a future, but on the other, I was watching my marriage crumble before my eyes. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I couldn't keep putting all my energy into this business while ignoring the cracks in my personal life. But the truth was, I didn't know what the future held anymore. I didn't know if Richard and I could ever go back to what we once were. All I knew was that I couldn't turn back now, not after everything I had done to get to this point. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure if it was worth it to fight for something that seemed to be slipping away, piece by piece. As the days stretched on, the distance between Richard and I grew, more like an unspoken acknowledgement that our marriage was deteriorating by the minute. It wasn't just the late nights, the cold silences, or his dismissiveness about my business. It was the realization that I had been invisible to him for so long. I had been pouring myself into this marriage, into our family, and into everything else, while my own needs, my own life, had been placed on the back burner for too long. And now, for the first time in years, I was putting myself first. But even so, I wasn't ready to give up completely. I wasn't ready to let go of everything just yet. I kept thinking maybe there was some way to fix things, some way to bring us back to a place where we could be happy again. But every time I tried to talk to him, it felt like I was talking to a wall. Richard had shut me out. And the harder I tried to break through, the more he pulled away. I had spent weeks focusing entirely on my business, watching it grow little by little. The office was starting to fill up with clients, and I could finally see the fruits of my labor beginning to blossom. But every success at work seemed to coincide with a failure in my personal life. Richard was barely around, and when he was, his mood was always dark and critical. He no longer even seemed to care about the kids' activities or our family events. He was emotionally checked out, and I realized that, despite my best efforts, there was no fixing what was broken. But then came the final straw. It happened one evening, when I was working late at the office. I got a call from the kids' school, nothing major, just an update on a parent-teacher meeting that had been scheduled. I quickly hung up and sent Richard a message, hoping to catch him before he went out for the night again. "Hey, there's a parent-teacher meeting tomorrow. Can you come? The kids really want you there." I expected a response that was something like, "I'll try," or, "I can't make it, I've got work." But instead, the reply I got was more abrupt than I could have imagined. "Why would you need me there? You've got it all covered. Maybe you should just handle it on your own, like you always do." I read it twice, feeling the words sink in. It wasn't just the fact that he didn't want to come, it was the way he dismissed my request, as though he didn't even see the value in being present for our kids. I didn't respond right away. I didn't know what to say. But then it hit me, like a rush of clarity. This wasn't just a simple failure to be present in our children's lives. This was a deeper issue. Richard had checked out of our family, and he had checked out of me. I put my phone down and sat there for a moment, letting the reality settle in. I had spent too long convincing myself that things could get better. That maybe if I just tried harder, he would change, or I could fix it somehow. But this? This was the moment I realized that Richard would never change. And that's when I made my decision. I didn't confront him right away. I let the message sit there for a few days. I didn't want to be hasty in making any decisions. Instead, I focused on my business, kept growing it, and continued to build the future that was finally mine. But in the back of my mind, I began planning. I had been careful with my finances, saving where I could, and making sure I didn't rely on Richard for anything. I knew how unpredictable he was, how quickly his moods could shift. But now, more than ever, I realized that I didn't need him. In fact, it was time for me to take control of this situation once and for all. A few weeks later, I went into our joint bank account and took the $5,000 I had been slowly saving for the past several months. It wasn't a huge sum, but it was enough to make a statement. I also made sure I had access to some of the household accounts, just in case. Then, I filed for divorce. I didn't do it in a dramatic way, or in front of anyone. I simply made it official. And I knew that once the papers were served, everything would change. But I wasn't done yet. Richard had always prided himself on being the one who made the big decisions. He was the one who had built a career, who provided for our family. He had always held the financial strings, the power in our relationship. But when the divorce papers arrived at the house, it was as though everything he had built came crashing down. When he saw them, his face turned pale, and I could see the wheels in his head turning. The reality of the situation began to hit him, and it wasn't just about losing me. It was about losing control. I hadn't told him about the money I'd saved or the office I'd purchased. I hadn't even mentioned how much I had accomplished on my own. But when he walked into the living room that afternoon, holding the divorce papers in his hand, I could tell that it was starting to sink in. "You're really doing this?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Yeah, Richard," I said calmly. "I am." "Over what? A stupid office? A few clients?" He tried to laugh it off, but I could see the panic in his eyes. "You're throwing everything away for this?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm throwing everything away for myself. I'm throwing everything away for a life that I finally have control over." His face twisted in frustration, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of power surge within me. I wasn't the person he could push around anymore. I wasn't the quiet wife who accepted whatever crumbs he gave me. I had my own life now, and I didn't need him or his approval to move forward. "You can't do this," he said, his tone almost desperate. "I already have," I replied. The divorce proceedings were messy, as they often are, but it was clear that Richard wasn't prepared for the level of independence I had achieved. When the settlement came through, I walked away with enough to keep my business growing and enough to secure a future where I didn't need him. What really hit him, though, wasn't the divorce itself, it was the fact that I didn't need him anymore. When he came to pick up some of his things, he asked me how the office was doing, and I could see the envy in his eyes. "Are you really making it, Evelyn? Is this actually working?" I looked him in the eye and smiled. "It's working just fine. Better than fine, actually." Richard didn't have anything to say after that. He just left, quietly, and I never heard from him again. As for me, I thrived. My business grew beyond my wildest dreams. I found my confidence again, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was living life on my own terms. It wasn't just about the office or the money, it was about taking control of my own story. It was about realizing that I had the power to make my own decisions, to make my own future, and that I didn't need anyone's permission to do so.